Hello and welcome to this session on opening in the age of COVID-19, designed by NSN for free schools who have opened in 2019 or 2020. My name is Hannah Jackson, Head of School Programmes here at NSN, and this session will be focusing on safeguarding and will be presented by NSN specialist Jane Lowe. Jane has held a number of roles as a head teacher and external expert for the DFE, supporting over 50 free schools to opening. She provides intervention and support to schools in challenging circumstances and school improvement support, focusing on leadership, development and safeguarding. This session will look at the importance of safeguarding, incidents you might need to safeguard against, how to establish a safeguarding curriculum, and safeguarding students in the context of COVID-19. If you have any questions following the session, please get in touch with us at events@newschoolsnetwork.org. I hope you enjoy the session. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jane Lowe. Thanks for the introduction, Hannah. And I'm here to present a session on safeguarding to you today. Very fortunate to work in lots of schools around the context of safeguarding, so I'll be drawing lots of my experiences from there and all the statutory requirements around safeguarding, as there are so many. Okay, I want to begin just by introducing this session by referring to Ofsted's definition around safeguarding, or a culture of safeguarding, which is what I want to focus on today. When they talk about a culture of safeguarding, they expect to see a school that always acts in the best interest of children, pupils and students to protect them both online and offline. An expectation that they will identify children, pupils and students who may need early help or who are at risk of harm or have been harmed. That they will secure and help the children and pupils and students determined by their needs and, if required, refer them in a timely way to experts and specialists who can help. They also expect schools to manage safer recruitment and allegations about adults who may be a risk to children, pupils, students. So the development of the culture, it's not just a tick box, it's not a compliance exercise, it's really about a way of thinking and doing which puts children at the centre, and it's a place where staff are professionally curious, and there's a culture of vigilance where staff and leaders always have in their minds that it could happen here. So that's the plan. Here are our aims. What I'd like to explore through the session are these key elements that help create that culture that Ofsted just defined. So our three aims, we start off by identifying the incidents, issues that we need to be aware of and plan for, and we'll look at that just now. We need to consider what the children need to know, understand and be able to do to keep themselves safe through a safeguarding curriculum. And also we need to reflect on COVID and how we operate and maintain a safeguarding culture within a really difficult context. So we'll save COVID until last. Okay, I want to start with a document that isn't always our go-to first document when it comes to safeguarding. Keeping children safe in education is normally the go-to for schools, which is absolutely right. However, Working Together to Safeguard Children is a great document that really clearly outlines how different agencies should work together and the roles they each have to play in keeping children safe. Their definition around safeguarding is these 4 key points here. And you can see, in short, these are our responsibilities. They're expected of all our agency partners. It takes a really holistic view of safeguarding, which very much aligns with the Ofsted definition. So it refers to health, development, care, safety, and the outcomes children secure as well. If we look at this, it's an enormous job, and it's not simply about prevention. It's about creating optimum conditions for children to thrive, which really aligns with the creation of a safeguarding culture that Ofsted talk about. So we'll use this definition here as a starter, but also later in the presentation. Okay, I want to share something with you here. And as you look at this slide, you'll see some familiarity with the names that appear for sure. Talked about a culture, and holistic safeguarding relies on a culture and a mindset. And this picture in front of us here gives an idea of some of the elements and the extremities of incidents in and around schools. Children around the edge of this diagram have all lost their lives in or around school. Those in the middle experienced a near miss at the time, but later another child died in a Russian airstrike. So let's just go through and remind ourselves of who these children are. In the middle, we have the 3 girls from Bethnal Green Academy, which were splattered all across the paper for a number of weeks, I'm sure you'll remember. In relation to safeguarding, though, what does that tell us that we need to build into our systems? And it's certain that we need to identify and protect children at risk of radicalisation. So lots of work has gone into schools around the prevent duty and how we do that. Okay, if we start to look around the edge, I'm sure names you'll remember are Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. And those were names that were brought into the media because of Ian Huntley, a caretaker in Sewham, who was convicted in 2003 and is now serving a minimum of 40 years. In respect to this, we can reflect and think about our safe and recruitment processes and how we as schools deter those who might abuse children and the systems that we have to do that. In 2013, Daniel Palker was beaten, force-fed salt, starved, held underwater and locked in a room without a door handle. He was just 4 when that happened. He attended school like any other 4-year-old. What can we take from that and what can we learn from that? In terms of our systems, they've got to be robust around identification, reporting and recording signs of abuse, and challenging other agencies to share information with us so that we can work together to keep children safe. An older child, Felix Alexander, lost his life at 17. Felix was from Worcester, and social media, unfortunately, had him branded as the most hated pupil in his school, which was initiated by a campaign of students within a particular school. That campaign and what that did to Felix forced him to take his own life at the very young age of just 17. What do we need to do to make sure this couldn't or shouldn't happen in our schools? We need to think about social media, how we manage and how we educate children to use it properly, but also think about our bullying policies, processes, procedures that helps children who may be feeling got at by others or maybe victim to social media abuse. Mohammed, age 15, and Mohammed, age 9. Both of these children lost their lives within the secondary school sector and one within the primary school sector. Both of these young men had additional needs. One of them had an allergy and the other was subject to using a wheelchair. Mohammed, age 15, had his wheelchair left unattended at the top of a staircase in a special school. And Mohammed, age 9, was unable to get access to his EpiPen when he had an allergic reaction to something he'd eaten at lunchtime. Both of those boys lost their lives because of access arrangements. So we need to make sure that children can access what they need, that appropriate supervision's in place to support them to get to the places they need to be at, get the medications that they require. But those reasonable adjustments must be made and also keep children safe at the same time. Jessica died at the age of 12. She was on a school trip in France having the time of her life. She was so excited about taking part of the trip. She sustained her head injury while swimming on that trip in France and as a result lost her life. Again, we need to think through what processes and systems do we have to assess and manage those risks. There's children who travel abroad, but equally travel down the road to the local park or the local sports centre to use their facilities. Kwamari, age 15, lost his life. He was stabbed multiple times by a teenager close to his school. The other teenager who stabbed him was just 15 too. He's now serving 14 years for the stabbing attack on Kwamari. What do we need to think through here? Yeah, we've got to think through curriculum, safeguarding curriculum, think about how we teach children about risk within the community, but we also need to think through critical incidents and how we respond to those. All of these different events are to share the enormity of safeguarding with you, its far-reaching remit, but also its ultimate consequences at times. This is not about blame, it's about being prepared and being able to build capacity within school, to have robust systems and have people who can spot, record, share information and intervene to reduce the risks around children. Okay, I'm going to take us back to Working Together, the document I mentioned earlier. And what you'll see around the edges of this slide are those 4 bullet points that was outlining their definition around safeguarding. And in the middle, we've got two children, stick ones albeit, but we've got 2 children. If we take their definition, and I said it was huge, it's a massive thing to do, and step up to our responsibilities, set the policies, develop them, share them with governors and staff, plan the procedures and train staff, and then introduce the children at the centre. The children will shape the school, the characteristics that they bring, the communities that they live in, their potential and academic ability will shape the way that leaders do things within a school. Let's look at each of those 4 elements that Working Together to Safeguard Children use to underpin their definition. If we are to keep children safe from maltreatment, within a school, we'll need systems that can identify, can spot signs, can see the triggers, but also screen for triggers too. Those systems will gather information, those tiny little changes that we see in children over time, but also some of those significant changes and issues that we spot. We'll be able to record and check back to look for patterns. And if we're going to keep children safe from maltreatment, we'll need really robust vetting and recruitment procedures. And that will involve a single central record, but it will involve really robust procedures around how we interview people, how we advertise jobs, and what we promote around our safeguarding practice. We'll also need to have robust lockdown procedures to think about some of those critical incidents that might occur. How do we keep all the children in if a threat's outside, and how do we get them out if there's a threat inside? The use of online learning or IT and remote learning for children has increased beyond all of our expectations as a result of COVID. The way in which we filter and monitor content and activity coming into school when children are online, are we able to monitor them and see what they're doing? And are we able to identify risks that they may be subjected to online, but also some of those things that they search for online that may tell us something about the risks in our lives, in their lives. Okay, the second element of the Working Together definition. If we're going to provide safe and effective care, this is huge. And it starts with the environment. To keep it safe, we'll need to think about everything from the asbestos register, Legionella testing, right to a supervision rota. Yeah, who's supervising corridors, who's supervising the playgrounds, what happens around arrival and departure times with the traffic, with the children, with visitors. Who will our educational visits coordinator be? And we'll need to train them to make sure that they can risk assess visits and help staff with visits that they are planning to. What happens to playtime when it's raining? Where do we put the children? Where do we have the staff? And how do we make sure they've got safe activities to engage in? When we have a fire drill, where do they all go? How do we organise them on the yard? How do we know if we've done a good job of it? How fast can they evacuate the building, and how effectively do we evacuate the building, and how do we get them back in? Rehearsal, rehearsal, rehearsal to get that right. When we run lockdown procedure, how do we reassure the children, and how do we let parents know that we're going to rehearse this, but it's nothing to worry about? Making sure that those drills run smoothly, like a well-oiled machine, and that children are used to those scenarios is really, really important, so that when we do need to respond, it happens without hesitation and everyone feels comfortable and confident in what they're doing. If we're to prevent health or developmental impairment, we're going to have to do a range of things. To keep children healthy, we're going to need to think about what are the menu options in the canteen. Yeah, it can't be pizza and chips every day. And how do we educate the children to make really healthy choices in the canteen? And how do we promote what's on offer in the canteen to make it attractive to the children? What does the PE curriculum offer look like to keep our children healthy? And hopefully to encourage them to engage in sport beyond school, beyond the school day, at their weekends, during holidays. For those children who've got additional medical needs or medical conditions, we'll need to think about training for staff to make sure they understand asthma, diabetes, allergic reactions, how to use EpiPens, and how to respond to children's symptoms as and when they see them. People in the school, again, will have to be designated first aiders, will need to understand how to manage and administer medications and how to record that. So to keep children healthy, it's far-reaching in terms of its expectations. We'll need to think about how we'll work with other agencies too. If we have access to a school nurse, we'll need to work with her on updating care plans, her or him on updating care plans. We'll need to tap into agencies to access mentoring and counselling support for some of our children with mental health needs. And again, COVID's seen a huge increase in that. So we'll need to consider how we ramp some of that up in response to events like COVID. Many of the staff may be trained in mental health first aid, or will need to be, to support children effectively. If we're going to provide a safe and healthy environment where staff are equipped to spot, report, record, intervene, and that a place where children are confident to report, ask for help, and build their own capacity to spot and manage risks, our systems will need to run effectively. Children will need to have a voice. Children will need to feel confident to speak up, and that dialogue and that confidence will only come from staff who encourage and promote that, and leaders who model that for the whole school community. If we manage to get all of those four things right, we will be able to secure the best outcomes. And it's the result of doing those three things that will bring good outcomes for children. They'll take different pathways towards the outcomes, but if we consider the customer journey or the pathway for each of those children in the middle, a child with a mental health problem, an underlying health condition, or a sensory impairment, or a looked after child, each of those children will need different things in relation to the working together definition that we've just talked through. In order to do that, staff will need to know about the characteristics of the children. They'll need to know how to support them and meet each of those needs. We'll also need to be sure that our systems are strong enough to find out about each of those needs. So what does admission look like for Year 7 pupils or new pupils to the school? Are we screening to find out about the well-being, health, and additional needs that children arrive at school with? In order to do that, we're going to need to build relationships with families so that they can be open and honest with us and report changes to their context as and when they arise. As parents and family members of children of school age, we'll all have personal experiences of how we felt as parents when your child or a child you knew went to school when they were ill, had an allergy, had additional needs, or went on an adventurous trip abroad or in this country. And thinking that through as a parent or caregiver or relative, there will be things that we were anxious about. So making clear policies, procedures, routines, and giving confidence to caregivers is a really important part of our practice too. Okay, a culture of vigilance. This was something that was talked about a lot when the new framework for Ofsted launched, and having a culture of vigilance in school is really, really important. But what does it actually mean? To be vigilant, it's really important that we use all of our senses. And by that, I mean, what have you seen? heard, smelt, and what do you feel about this? And always having in the back of our minds that it could happen here. In order to do that, it can't just be about leaders in a school, although they all need to carry it in the back of their minds. Leaders need to train the staff to be professionally curious. And to be professionally curious, staff need to look, listen, ask questions of students. And when they talk to students, they need to listen and they need to hear and they might need to probe. And again, COVID has really amplified this for us. We've got huge gaps for children who've been out of school for many, many months in some cases, and some children up to a year. So to be professionally curious, to plug that gap and find out where that child or that family is up to is incredibly important. And some of the staff, teachers, support staff who've never had a pastoral role, have never had to do this before, but now they're being asked to do it. So leaders will need to train staff to be professionally curious. They'll need to model it. They'll need to remind staff, and they'll need to show them how to question, show them how to probe, and educate them on how to spot risk, manage it, and mitigate it. And they'll do that by being on corridors, being in the canteen, but also having conversations with children as and when it's needed. Staff need to understand how to do that. I've seen some great examples during COVID of scripted conversations for staff who've never had to call a parent before, not around welfare and well-being, but that kind of training has been so effective during such a difficult time. So culture of vigilance, really, really important, and especially important right now. Okay, I want to talk about safeguarding curriculum, and it's something that we have to talk about. Keeping children safe in education for a number of years now, and this hasn't gone away, tells us that we must provide a safeguarding curriculum which upskills children to keep themselves safe. In order to do this, we have to provide a great training programme offer for staff, and you'll see I've aligned staff and pupils' needs side by side there. We've got to ensure that the staff have got the capacity, the knowledge, and most importantly, the confidence to deliver a safeguarding curriculum. Depending on your school culture, it could be form teachers, sometimes it's RE teachers, or sometimes it's specialist designated teachers who are delivering PSHE. Whoever it is, their training and their support is absolutely critical. The curriculum has got to be about empowering and enabling, and also building your own capacity to safeguard. So the training that you do for staff and the curriculum that you deliver to children will only build your capacity as a school. The more people, staff and students, we've got on the job, spotting risk, spotting safeguarding issues, and letting us know and doing something about it, the more successful will be as a school as having a robust, vigilant safeguarding culture. If we look at the staff first of all, what I've outlined there are the core elements that I feel staff need. First of all, the context of the school. We know that we have to take on board DFE and Ofsted requirements in terms of those themes around safeguarding, those that feature in keeping children safe that staff all sign up to each year. We have to focus on that. But we've also got to focus on the safeguarding context of the school. Now, that's going to come from the safeguarding data that sits in school. So if you're using an electronic system or a paper system to record signs, issues, and risks around children, it will give you some data and it'll tell you where the spikes are. So if you're a school who has a spike around domestic violence, peer-on-peer abuse, whatever it might be, you will need to give that attention within the training programme for staff so that they are confident to respond to incidents when they occur, confident to spot signs of issues that might flag up, and that you can give them significant attention within the curriculum to upskill children in the same way too. The wider context is critical. I've mentioned DfE and Ofsted and their expectations, but we've always got to look for what's coming. So whilst we'll have our local context, we might have a view as leaders that, well, actually, gangs doesn't really feature in our data, or prevent isn't really an issue here. Well, of course, it's an issue for everybody. The children have got to be alert to these risks, as have staff. So keeping a wider eye to think about what's coming is really, really important. And that might come from local authority leaders in your area who might provide training, but also beyond that, particular voluntary organisations who can offer you support. Implementation and understanding of policies. That's thinking about how staff apply the policy, rehearse it, and internalise it and make it run. So keeping that alive is really, really important. You might ask staff safeguarding questions at the beginning of the week on a particular topic, ask them to go away and work on it, and then on Friday ask for a debrief and their answers, just to check they understand that they know how that's going to run. That could be whistleblowing, it could be reporting issues or concerns, it could be a whole host of different things, just to check understanding. We also need to make sure that staff can deliver really, really effective support, pastoral support, so that if they're delivering safeguarding curriculum and a child makes a disclosure, all the sensitivities around a child, because within their context, they probably experience the issue that you're talking about. We need to make sure that staff can respond to that sensitively, supportively, and offer some really constructive support and wraparound care around children. And then we've got to think about what goes into the curriculum and how we upskill staff on that. We've got to look at keeping children safe, to think about all of the key themes, but also think about how it features in assemblies, in form times, and thinking about how they weave it into their subject offer too. So lots of training needed for staff. In terms of the children and their safeguarding curriculum offer, it kind of goes hand in hand really. They need to understand and access the systems and policies and support in school. They need to know, and we need to tell them, who are the designated safeguarding leads? Who are the safeguarding team? If I've got a concern or a worry, where do I go? And how does the system work if I raise a concern or a worry too? Knowing that they can access people swiftly who they can trust and rely on to respond in a positive way. We need to upskill the pupils to recognise and assess risks and triggers of those that exist around them, those that exist in their community, but also potentially around their peers. And we need to help them make informed choices. And we can do that by teaching them how to calculate risk, to know where to go to get help, how to self-help, how to self-refer, and think about their personal development, their qualities and their strengths. So teaching them how to be assertive, how to make informed decisions, where to go to for advice, how to weigh up advice, and to think about how they respond to that. Finally, they need to be able to manage risks and stay safe. That's the ultimate test for our safeguarding curriculum. They need to be able to put the knowledge, skills and understanding that we've delivered in the curriculum to good use. And they need to be able to do it beyond school, not just in school. They need to be able to do it online during their journey to and from school each day, within their peer group, within school, and also outside school in their own communities. They need to know where to go to disclose if they needed to, and where they might seek peer support from too. So our safeguarding curriculum has got to be pretty outstanding to deliver on all of those things and ultimately empower the staff and enable children to keep themselves safe, with our support, of course. Okay, it's sad really to end on COVID, but there've been some positive things about COVID too. So in relation to COVID, the things that we know that are really, really clear, and the DfE issued guidance on this right at the start, is that keeping children safe in education is statutory. It hasn't gone anywhere, and we still need to continue that despite COVID, and it's more important than ever. We all know that. They expected a policy addendum to say how things were going to run in relation to a DSL rota or cover, arrangements for reporting and recording, how we train staff, that's changed significantly in light of COVID, how we communicate with families, with our staff, with our children. Safer recruitment still got to be thought about and needs to go on that policy addendum. We've had to recruit in quite a different way. And the added safeguards and potential risks that have come through COVID too. And schools did a great job of the addendum. It was almost like an emergency procedure outlining key elements, the role of the DSL, remote learning was a key part of that addendum, as was liaison with other agencies and well-being arrangements around all families, not just vulnerable ones actually. Delivery methods have changed significantly, not just for schools, for all of the agencies who come together around safeguarding. And delivery methods around communications, visits, home visits have changed significantly, almost beyond recognition in some cases. The way in which we liaise with external agencies has changed. There's so much more virtual work now. And there are some positive things to say about that. Communications with the children, remote learning and remote welfare was really challenging to begin with, but delivering that in a different way, school leaders have become more comfortable with that, as have other staff across the school. So let's explore some of that a bit further. Okay, I'd like to look at 3 different elements here around how we safeguard within the context of COVID. And the 3 really important elements are school systems, the children and families, and our staff. Boiling it back to basics really, what's really important here. Systems have really been tested as a result of COVID, and electronic systems have ultimately provided a lifeline to almost all schools. We know there have been challenges with access to devices for children, and in some cases, geography's played a real part around Wi-Fi and connectivity. But in most cases, electronic systems have aided communication and enabled schools to engage in welfare contact in a completely different way. And safeguarding systems, ironically, have been used so much more, not just to look at safeguarding, but also to look at general welfare. There are loads of electronic systems out there, but many schools that I visit, majority of schools I visited during COVID, have used their safeguarding system to log all of their welfare calls and to log any concerns, conversations, all communications with families, so that they've got a capture that is live and it offers live real-time reporting for all staff, but also it allows the staff team to build a safeguarding picture around every child who was stuck at home during lockdown, during this difficult time. So recording and reporting has been key. DSL duties have been rotarised in most schools, so that DSLs have oversight of what's going on. Because there's been so much electronic communication, that's been really important. Lots of alerts to DSLs for them to pick up. So knowing who's on duty is important. And that's looked different for the staff. Staff have probably made contact with DSLs during normal times by logging a concern online and then going and having a chat with them or picking up the phone. But that's changed for many. So changing the arrangements around reporting concerns and having contact with the DSL has changed. And DSLs have had a hefty workload through COVID. So rotarising that has been helpful. And also by doing that, it's brought lots of schools' attention to the DSL cover and the number of DSLs they have trained in school to provide that cover and that level of support to families, but also to staff. Systems around absence, pastoral and welfare procedures have also been tested, and remote learning has been incredibly challenging for lots of people. Absence recording has changed throughout, and once we kind of got into a situation of logging absence due to self-isolation, or whatever it might be. DfE offered up more guidance around how to log that. But our absence and non-engagement has got to be followed up, and it's got to align with safeguarding duties. So making sure that the systems around recording non-attendance, not just on site for vulnerable children, but also in remote learning, has been incredibly important to enable staff to follow up, go and find out what's happening, are there connectivity issues, what are the barriers, can we help you? But equally, to share that high expectation that children will be involved and will engage in remote learning. So the systems to operate around that have been really important. I've seen some excellent systems that have developed within a matter of weeks to follow up non-engagement and remote learning, that have provided really strong pastoral and welfare support to families and children who really, really needed it, to be motivated to engage in remote learning and then be confident to access that facility. So systems have been critical. And there's lots of learning we've done around systems that we definitely need to hang on to. The second element, the most important element, I guess, in some ways, is the children and families. Now, initially, we were given a definition which changed over time around who the vulnerable cohort were. And we were expected to give them an on-site offer. Some of those children engaged with that and some children didn't, in many schools up and down the country. But what schools also did was look at extensions. COVID, as it developed, created a new vulnerable cohort of its own. Many school leaders spoke to me about children who were now on the radar, who'd never been on the radar before. And so the vulnerable cohort and extensions has been an important part of that, in giving those children who have suffered really negatively as a result of COVID an on-site offer has been a lifeline to a number of families and children, and has certainly been the right thing to do to intervene to prevent serious risks around children who previously weren't on the radar. But making provision for that vulnerable cohort and the extensions has been critical. Contact, signposting and engagement. So it's a question of, how do pastoral staff see the kids now? So when they haven't been in school, I know planned return obviously to have everyone back in next week, and let's hope this doesn't happen again, but we will still have children who will be self-isolating until we can sort out COVID completely. So contact, signposting and engagement has been critical, and having that contact has been really, really important. And schools have got more and more creative over time in doing this, and the contact's been important to see how the children are, to do the catch up, but also in many cases to allow children and families to vent and offload challenging times. Some families won't be leaving the house. Some children and families have been shielding since the start of all this. So giving them an opportunity to do that has been incredibly important. Equally, I've seen pastoral staff celebrating and sending out praise messages to families, and giving coaching to children and giving help and signposting to families. Now, they've done that in a number of ways. Lots of schools have been hosting form times online and assemblies online, and also offering one-to-ones to all of the children to create the time and space to give children the chance to talk and reflect on their experiences of COVID, so that pastoral staff can be alert to that, and give them the opportunity to have that contact, have that catch up, and have that coaching opportunity. It's also enabled the pastoral staff to find out what's happened in the gap. I saw a wonderful activity in a school who, after return during the September to December period when children were back in school, did the most wonderful PSHE activity where children wrote a story of lockdown 1 and what it was like for them. And it was the most eye-opening activity I've ever seen. Some of the pieces that children had written were incredibly sad, but also gave the pastoral team a really, really accurate baseline of events and issues that they were going to need to deal with and work through with the DSL and other people to get support out to families. So giving that opportunity was really, really important. In terms of the staff, okay, let's not forget the staff. They've been our greatest resource through all of this, and continue to be our greatest resource. I've made reference to some of this already, but schools have had to invest in retraining staff on how to conduct themselves safely in a completely new environment in some cases. Staff have been delivering on site face-to-face, but the remote learning environment is a completely new one for the vast majority of staff. And ordinarily, staff who are delivering from home wouldn't invite children into their home. However, the platform of Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Google Meet or whatever platform people are using has done just that, which is quite radical if we think it through, if we had time to stop and think it through. So it's really important that we think about safer working practices for staff, and that we train them to create boundaries, really simple things like background, in some cases the attire that staff are wearing, the language that they use, timing. One of the things I'm picking up in relation to safeguarding is some really, really low level referrals to LADO, Local Authority Designated Officer, around staff conduct during remote learning. And lots of these issues are really naive mistakes on the part of staff. And they've had the best of intentions to get things right in relation to remote learning, but creating boundaries in your own home is challenging unless it's scripted by school leaders. So that's been really, really important. And leaders have had to and must prioritise online safety and preaching and promoting that to staff and children, creating the boundaries for remote working. How will lessons start, end? What does pastoral support look like? What kind of questions will staff pose? And how will we record and report what the children share with us as a result of that? The other key element, and I've mentioned this phrase before, has been around professional curiosity. So staff equally are having the opportunity to look inside a child's context within the remote learning environment. And on a pastoral one-to-one virtual session, they're probably getting quite a good look inside a child's home or family life. Some teachers have said to me they've got to know families so much better during COVID and remote learning, as they've often taken part in lessons until they've advised them to kind of step aside. But the professional curiosity is needed right now to encourage staff to explore the gaps that our children have and be alert to all of the signs that they might see online or face-to-face. And some of those signs might look different online. They might be far less obvious, and staff might need to search and look a little bit harder for some of those things. But they need to be taught how to do that. They need to be taught about what to look for, what are the questions, how do I probe without overstepping the mark, and give children space and time to share and talk about where they're up to. So more staff training needed about professional curiosity for sure. Okay, I want to end with this in terms of COVID, because as I say, it's not all bad. As educationalists, we're learning all the time, and it's something that we teach the children and our staff. Actually, learning doesn't really stop. Some great things have come out of COVID, and we certainly need to hang on to and build on some of those lessons that we have learned. Electronic communications and the development of that has been so rapid, it's kind of beyond thinking really. And to hear stories of teachers literally moving from face-to-face delivery within 24, 48 hours. So brave to take that on, and so confident and full of energy to engage in that process and want to reach out to learners so rapidly. we can't lose that when the children return, and we won't be able to, because we'll still need to maintain that for some of the children who can't return next week or who need to take spells out. We have to hang on to what we've learned. It makes us, staff, leaders, much more efficient and accessible to children, to the staff team, to families. We need to maintain a balance with what the children get when they come back, but we have to utilise its power. For example, transition into primary or secondary has been so completely different this academic year. It's been different and it's been challenging, but many aspects of it have gone really, really well. The way in which schools responded with virtual tours, virtual meetings for parents, socially distant visits on site, but the use of virtual communication was a key part of that. And working, the school who has 20 different feeders or pulls on really difficult geography, we need to use that this coming academic year, not to eradicate the face-to-face, but to make sure we're efficient with resources and we're accessible to get hold of that information and that intel we need about children. The remote and independent learning, the children have surprised us too. Their agility, tenacity and energy in approaching remote learning has been really impressive in some cases. The other really interesting thing in some of the cases where children have really complex needs in special and AP sector in particular, I've noticed this, that some children have engaged for the very first time. So lots of children who were non-attenders or who had chronic absence in school have engaged for the first time because it's been doable. It suited their learning style and they've been able to take part because they haven't had to get past their threshold and over the school threshold too. And as part of that, that's incredibly impressive for those children, and we have to hang on to that and use that as a mechanism and a tool to bring them back in, but also to recognise and celebrate what they've done well remotely. Children have also been taught to be self-starters and stick with things. You know, not having your teacher on hand where you can stick out your hand and they come and help you out immediately. Children have had to develop resilience, had to have a go and try things for themselves, maybe ask the family. Families, I'm sure, are benefiting from all of those bigger conversations that they didn't have before. But some of that resilience and independence, again, we've got to hang on to that and build that into our curriculum as we move forward. School environments have changed massively in terms of the way that they look and the way that they're organised. That's been challenging for some schools with awkward buildings and geography. However, those changes, whilst again leaders responded to this rapidly to address lots of the physical elements of reducing the infection. But things like bubbles, zoning, staggering lunch, staggering arrival and departure have had the most massive impact on behaviour. Almost every safeguarding review that I've done since the start of COVID, so a year ago now, every leader that I speak to is hanging on to some physical changes that COVID has brought. It's changed experiences for staff and children in terms of the way in which they manage the school, and they're hanging on to lots of it. Year 7 transition was difficult, and transition into primary difficult too, because of the restrictions around face-to-face contact with previous settings or the family to do home visits. However, the offer that those children have had who first joined the school in many cases has been so overcompensated. They've had a great deal. I've spoken to lots of children who love their year group zone and love the fact that they all have lunch together in their year group. So lots of these changes have brought positives that we certainly need to reflect on and build into future years. Relationships and trust. Schools have impressed everybody really up and down the country throughout COVID, and I think families have also learned to understand the pressures and challenges that teachers face now they've had a taste of home learning. But the relationships and trust that have been built with families during COVID have been absolutely mind-blowing. Lots of case studies I've looked at have, been hugely impressive. Those relationships have grown and been strengthened throughout this time, and heads report to me relationships often with their hardest to reach and the most complex families have certainly been strengthened. During this time, schools have become the trusted adult. They've interpreted the messaging from the government. They've been the provider of food in many cases. They've been there for welfare, signposting that the children and families have needed. In some cases, I was in a school a few weeks ago where they even were the deliverers of Christmas lunch in some cases. So schools have become, if they weren't before, the pillar of the community. They are the trusted people now that families go to. And lots of leaders report that that strengthening of relationships is really, really encouraging going forward, particularly with hard to reach families. They are already seeing, they did in the September to December period, real commitment in terms of attendance, in terms of behaviour and engaging with the school. And again, we've got to hold on to that and take that forward. Using electronic communications in future could be a real key to that, to be efficient and accessible to families. The pastoral capacity, I've alluded to this throughout the presentation, but all of our staff have stepped up massively in a pastoral capacity to talk with families, offering support in the remote learning environment, holding virtual meetings with families in their living rooms, which takes them inside their homes and gives them an idea of their context. And the power of that has been palpable in lots of contexts. And staff have been trained effectively to deliver those conversations and deliver that kind of support. And again, using that in the future is going to be really powerful for hard to reach families, but also for those who are struggling, facing an issue, just to jolly those children along, give support to the family where it's needed, and keep a real positive focus on school. Okay, so the positive sides of COVID, I thought it was important to reflect on that. Okay, if I reflect back now on all of the presentation, I've got 7 key things really, which are takeaways, which I'm sure I've already emphasised already. The first thing is about a safeguarding culture. Culture is going to be built. It always needs investment and it always needs leadership. It's not just about compliance. So you'll need to test systems, policies all of the time. We'll need to invest in our staff through training and invest in the children through a really high quality curriculum and a decent safeguarding curriculum that allows them to manage and assess risks. That safeguarding culture has got to be tangible for staff. So if we go back to the working together definition that we've looked at a couple of times through this presentation, simple things to have staff ask of themselves and of each other. We need to challenge each other to make this culture strong. Is it healthy? Is it safe? Is it best for the children? Those are the things we've got to be asking ourselves all the time. And that's to do with wet play supervision. You know, is this safe? It's to do with some of the COVID stuff around testing and social distancing. Is this the right way? Is this the best way? And safeguarding curriculum. Yeah, how are we spending our time on safeguarding curriculum? Is this best for the children? And COVID might rearrange what's best for the children. A real focus on mental health at the moment is really important for safeguarding curriculum. So what's best for the children? Is it healthy? Is it safe? Always consider that it could happen here. Okay, if you think ahead, you're far better prepared to spot risk and minimise it. So always thinking about what the worst case scenario could be is often the best way to think. It allows us to plan and spot risks before they arise. And if we think about the 8th of March as a starting point, that reset, getting the children back in safely and organisationally, but also resetting on behaviour, routines and expectations. So thinking through worst case scenarios, okay, how are we going to manage the first break time? What could go wrong? How are we going to manage the first form time? What about the first fire drill? So thinking through all of those scenarios is really, really important. And not just children-based scenarios, you know, thinking through staffing scenarios too, thinking through environmental factors. Testing systems, staff and children. Hopefully, we don't have to action some of the systems that we have, such as lockdown procedure or the fire drill. We just do a drill, we don't have a fire, but making sure that we do test those all of the time is really, really important, so they're slick and they run well. An ongoing safeguarding dialogue is really, really important. It has to be a live agenda. I think, again, COVID's taught us a lot around that. We've been talking around safeguarding all of the time in schools throughout this pandemic. And that live agenda could be questions around the policy. That could be a leadership team out on corridors asking staff about whistleblowing procedures, asking staff about reporting a concern, or an element of the safeguarding curriculum. It could also be visitors on site. You know, what do you do if you see someone on site who isn't a known visitor? So testing the staff. You could also test the children around policies and procedures and how we respond. We could pose scenario questions to staff through staff briefings. We could raise issues through PSHE themes to get children thinking and alert to issues and challenges. Keeping safeguarding dialogue alive is really, really important. As I said, COVID's helped us rethink about that dialogue and think about the importance of some elements. So again, mental health, real key focus right now. Professional curiosity is really, really important, ever more so with COVID. So we've got to train and support staff to be alert to signs. What do they see? What do they hear? What do they smell? And what do they feel? And get them to probe, ask questions to find out what's happened to these children during this year to make sure that we're up to date with the context. And finally, really, really important to empower the children. And to do that, we'll need an excellent safeguarding curriculum, and we'll need a structure that makes the student leaders within the school. So is there a student leadership structure? Do they have an opportunity to speak out, be represented, talk about what's troubling them or concerning them? Do we ask them their views on our policies and procedures, if they're working, how safe they feel, where they go to, do they know who the right people are? So making sure the children have a voice to tell us how it's working, as the customers, of course, is a really important element of this. So those are the 7 go-tos. I hope the presentation's been useful in terms of safeguarding, culture of safeguarding, and also COVID. Thank you.